Little earlier on this afternoon. When the Commission for Gender Equality was established almost 25 years ago, its mandate was to promote respect, protect and, support the development of women. The independent Chapter 9 institution's functions include the capacity to monitor, investigate, research, educate, lobby, advise and report on issues concerning gender equality. Well, let's look at whether it's been successful in advancing this mandate. We're joined by the Commission for Gender Equality Deputy Chairperson, Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko. Dr. Moleko, a very good evening to you and thanks for your time. So part of your mandate as the Commission is not only to assess where the state is or where government is in terms of realizing a true equal society, equal opportunity world for women in this country, but to also hold government accountable where it is failing in not doing that. There is no question about the fact that the women of South Africa have been failed on multiple fronts. I've got the statistics open in front of me and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to look at some of them. But just more broadly, as far as the Commission is concerned, do you think you've really been effective in your work? And if you think you have been, give me a couple of examples.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for having me, and a very good evening to the listeners. I think let me be very frank in the discussion. We have had an inward-looking session looking at the stats, assessing what has been done, if progress has been made across politics, education, business, economic participation, and specifically GBV. And I think as a commission, we have said one of the things we are very good at is focusing on the things that we can do. For an example, we can go and do legislative reform. We do go and make inputs into bills. We do research. But the weakness in CGE, which we have inwardly said we need to improve, Kathy, and this is something ourselves we have accepted to say, the focus going forward as an institution is to monitor. The focus going forward as an institution is to strengthen being a watchdog. The focus going forward is not only on the public sector, but also in the private, to civil society and academia, all the parts of society where we have failed to necessarily hold to account the institutions to the level and extent we have powers to. I think we have not necessarily realized a society free of gender oppression. And I think we've got to do more. And I welcome the point that you're making, Kathy, that says we must do more because society requires that we do more, but also ourselves inwardly. We've looked at the structure of the organization, how we are structured as an organization from a strategic perspective. And we've said we need to strengthen our monitoring and evaluation perspective within research so that we can focus on M&E, follow-ups to our research report, follow-ups to the recommendations we've made. So this is a systemic issue in the organization. What we've then done is say, what are the tools and the systemic ways to actually look at monitoring and evaluation? And that speaks to looking at all the recommendations you've done over the years, all the reports, we've done several reports, all the research, all the legal hearings we've done. Of those recommendations that have not been implemented, we've got to follow those through. We've got to hold those government departments to account. And it requires a changing of the organization, a changing of the slanting of the organization. And I must say, Kathy, it is an ongoing process and we are getting there.
Dr. Moleko, you bring me to my next point, and it's good for the Commission to be able to acknowledge the fact that it has in some instances failed when it comes to monitoring and being able to hold, in particular in this instance, government accountable. But this is not new. It's not information that is new to the Commission as well. And we are living in a country where the majority of the people in this country, being females, are depending on institutions like the Gender Commission to be able to fully function, to be fully functional, because it is through accountability that the situation and the state of women in this country can actually be changed. So how are you going to be improving the work that you are doing? What are you going to be doing differently? And why should we believe you now? Because I can remember speaking to previous officials in that very same position who promised the exact same thing, that you are promising us tonight. And yet the track record continues to suggest something different.
I think you can believe me. I think what you need to ask is what will be done differently and how we as a commission believe we need to put emphasis on specific systemic issues that have not yielded results. I think the first one, Kathy, is what will we be doing differently? So just to expand on that, we have picked up that when you look at the systemic issues in the country, particularly where the gender oppression persists, one, it's on GBV. So we know that the gender-based violence issue, particularly when you look at the police stations and what is happening with the police, is not improving. When you look at the systemic issues in the justice cluster, we are not seeing improvement. Where does the CGE fit in? In our own planning, which we have never done before, we've always looked at rather the legislative imperative, the Sexual Offences Amendment Act, the bills, making input into those bills, making advancement on the legislative side. But on the ground, this is where things are moving very slow. We have targeted more than 400 police stations, which we are doing on-the-ground monitoring and evaluation as we speak. In the last 2 quarters, Kathy, we have done approximately, I'm approximating the numbers, less than 100, but let's say over 50 police stations across the country, where we are targeting in the next 2 years to look at all the police stations in the country. We've got a model where we're looking at the tooling, at looking at the outcomes of domestic violence cases, sexual assault, rape. We're looking at what happens after individuals go to police stations, how far those cases go, and when the prosecution happens. We're looking at the systemic issues in the police stations because we've never done this before. Instead, what we do as a country, even as the CGE has fallen into this trap, where we look at the statistics that are announced later on in the year, whether it's quarterly, annually, and we respond to these, have media press briefings about these, but in our internal workings, there's very little systemic issue doing M&E. The outcome of this, Kathy, on the police, just on SAPS, on the justice cluster, ensuring access to justice to victims, is to say, once we have done the assessments, we go to the regional police commissioners, we go to the national police commissioner, we address the findings, we address the shortcomings, and we make that public. We continue then to do monitoring and evaluation of those police stations, of those cases, and this becomes ingrained in the culture of CGE, but also in the institutions that we monitor. The second one is on the economic inequality. We know that there's perpetual inequality that exists, whether it's the pay gap, whether we're looking at unemployment, whether it's looking at the greater macroeconomic disparities in the labor market. This is persistent to our country's economic landscape. What we have then done, beyond looking at what we call webinars or discussions, which we have done to have a consensus on some of the move forward, but the legislative reform is required. What CGE has then said is, let's go beyond the box ticking. Let's look and oversee the allocation of financial resources, but also ensure the allocation of financial aid to women in business. So we are overseeing, looking at M&D again. We are now overseeing the procurement allocation of 40%. Again, this is strengthening that 40% target of the state and making sure that we hold the state to account. How are we doing this? We are monitoring, looking at the reports, looking at the numbers. We have not previously necessarily done this to this extent. So I'm saying that we are aware of the shortcomings. We cannot run away from the negation of outcomes that speak to gender equality because we haven't seen this. But I think what is important is how then do we put in place systems internally, policies internally, but also outwardly that will impact and show that accountability must happen. The last I want to talk to Kathy is on the sexual crimes and violation of women, on gender-based violence. We've recently done the ERAP, which is the Emergency Response Action Plan, which was a response to the GBV commitments by the government, right? The president announced commitments. This was October 2019 to 2020. We then monitored what has the state done. We then, after assessing the 81 outcomes, we reported on the 22 departments. We've spoken to all 22. 8 of them have given feedback on our findings. We are taking that forward to the parliamentary committee and the relevant clusters to say 14 have done nothing. We are holding them to account and we are not stopping. So for the first time, we're saying, let's posture ourselves as an organization to monitor, to make sure we will not be what's the word? We will not be popular for this. We will not be liked by this. But unfortunately, for the benefit of the people of South Africa, for the women and the girl children, for those who are marginalized, who are affected by the lack of a responsiveness and urgency on these matters, it is only the CGE that can really having the mandate to do something about these things that should take these issues forward.
Dr.
So I'm saying
Moleko,
that.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it there with you for tonight. I see I've got you all fired up. We're certainly going to have more of this conversation. Deputy Chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality. When News at Prime continues, we look at the financial woes that have been piling up. This is in particular for the low-cost state carrier Mango. Do stay with us.